It's funny to think that when I first went to VidCon years and years and years ago, I was an anti-SJW grifter living in my mother's basement, dreaming of flying off to California to go ahead and meet my fellow skeptics. And if anything, meeting those people for real pushed me further away from them than anything else could. There's something about seeing a vast sea of pale, chubby YouTubers with beards born out of their lack of motivation to shave, and all of them wearing clothes which don't quite fit their bodies, which makes one question, why does my personal ideology seem to appeal almost exclusively to people who look like me, people who act like me, and most importantly, people who live like me? The realistic background of my beliefs was that they were born from a lack of context of the outside world. I lived in a basement, I spent all my time making slightly edgy movie reviews for YouTube, and I rarely ever talked to anyone other than myself. Going to VidCon made me look at people and say, you're real, I have to talk to you like you're real, and I have to work to understand you like you're a real person. It made modern social issues a lot more legitimate to me and made me care a lot more about the real world, and thus made all of the petty nonsense that I was seeing going on in my own community feel a lot less worthy of my time. And it was because of VidCon last year that I met Natalie Wynn at the Cheesecake Factory, and having absolutely no idea who she was, I decided to go home and binge a bunch of her channel. And I think no other person has more influenced not only the sort of content I want to make, but also the person I want to strive to be. Contrapoints is the only YouTuber. All other YouTubers are cancelled. As far as I'm concerned, she is the most subscribed to personality literally everywhere because no one else on the internet exists. She is our dark queen, our glorious mother and comrade. All hail Contrapoints, for she shall lead us out of darkness.
Glory, glory,
So for those of you who have yet to experience the spiritual enlightenment that is a Contrapoints binge, allow me to fill you in. Natalie Wynn is a leftist content creator who discusses issues in the world and online. Now, usually when I talk about content creators I like or dislike, I look at sort of an evolution of their content from start to finish. But because some of Natalie's content is constructed to be a point of discovery and other videos are more intense and insighty, it's probably best to study her instead in the order that you would be recommended viewing her. One of the first Contrapoints videos I saw was her classic piece Incels, which analyzes the online movement of men who believe that they are celibate involuntarily and are thus to some extent oppressed. The video is easily one of the best video essays of the decade, and arguably has done a lot to make the art form feel like something that should be taken more seriously by mainstream resources. The reason that the Incel video is so highly regarded and great is that she manages to cover it from two perspectives. The first is the obvious misogyny behind the movement, that it exists off of the pretense that a woman's single role in a man's life is as a sexual partner, and the active perception of various women in the movement are based entirely around if they're fuckable and why they wouldn't fuck the incels either way. But she also goes down a bit of another path, albeit with a bit more precaution, of trying to understand how so many men end up identifying with this movement. Obviously, she still demonizes those involved, because by all accounts she definitely should, but she still manages to put into context how so many people end up in that position. It's a message of, hey incels, the way you are is bad, and it's mostly your fault, but just because you are where you are doesn't mean you can't change. Indeed, a lot of the video is dedicated to discussing how incel culture is based around telling men in the movement that they will never find companionship or happiness because they are too ugly for anyone to ever want to be with. Her point is, universally, these men do have the capabilities of finding what they want if they just change their personalities enough to be approachable in social groups, and the community standard of disputing this and saying that every single virgin in America has some certain quality about their physical appearance which is unchangeable and will thus make them alone forever and ever, only makes it less likely that they'll ever get around to becoming self-actualized, and thus they'll probably never pop the cherry. I promise you this entire video isn't just going to be me restating Natalie's opinions, but in a less interesting way. But I think it's generally important to point out how her videos are often made with deeper points that no one really asks her to include, which I think is a mark of her content which makes her a lot more interesting than other channels. Also, it's pretty important that in this part of the video that I discuss her content as much as I can, because in part 2 I'm mostly going to be talking about YouTube trends and the algorithm and stuff like that, and it might seem like I've forgotten about her for a bit. Out of all the topics that Natalie has covered in her series, the most well-known of these has almost certainly been her discussions of the LGBTQ community. Many of these videos just scratch the surface in a way which will likely appeal to people who don't have many resources to be told about these things openly, but she's been known for taking deep dives into the psychology of many involved with these communities. Outside of this, Natalie's content often focuses on the rise of white supremacist and general fascist culture online and in the real world. One of her characters, which she has been playing for a long time, is the Nazi, who is, well, a Nazi. The joke of her character is that despite clearly being a fascist and even dressing up like one, many of the characters on the show outright refuse to admit that she is alt-right. Where the character comes too close to home is when she will end up actually quoting modern white supremacist rhetoric word for word, petitioning for a white homeland and claiming that representation is oppression against white people, while the centrist characters refuse to decry this as Nazism because when the character is asked if she's a Nazi, she says,
No, of course not.
Through this, Natalie criticizes not just extremists, but those who stand next to them and pretend like they aren't a part of what's wrong. Specifically, her fake show The Freedom Report is an overt parody of Dave Rubin's The Dave Rubin Report, which Natalie rightfully criticizes for featuring extremist talking points without having on guests who would then challenge those points, such as herself. But out of all the characters that Natalie has envisioned for her show, perhaps the most fascinating is Tabby, a representation of Natalie's issues with how the left tends to present itself.
Death to capitalism! Hail Satan!
Now, I feel like I'm in a weird position with this character, where I know that she was intended to mock the public image that the left often has, and yet I unironically love everything about her. I think that in a world where so many in the trans community are victims of acts of violence in the West, there's something so cathartic about a trans woman who carries around a bat and makes Nazis shit themselves and run away. I know that it's also probably not a good image to outsiders, and that's the point, but I frankly don't care, and don't expect me to because I just don't. But generally my favorite thing about the stuff that Natalie points out is when she makes content challenging basic social norms, and how they prove to be problematic both personally and culturally. Beauty, another video which is considered to be a premier example of a quality video essay, goes through so many elements of that topic with a fine comb that I feel like giving it just one thesis statement is selling it too short. Natalie really is an incredible talent of breaking down issues and explaining not only why they influence other things in the world, but also how they are influenced by a larger design, by something out of their hands. But I didn't generally choose to make a video like this just to talk about why I like her, but also to discuss a lot of the positive influence that she has brought forth comprehensively. So join me, ladies, gents, and non-binaries, as we discuss...
His truth is marching on. Death to capitalism and the patriarchy, smash the binary, hail Satan. Ow!
It's become quite a noticeable trend in the past year that people who are bad or on the path to being really bad have suddenly found themselves breaking free of those chains and slipping loose of the indoctrination and making a better path for themselves. And I've seen a lot of people like Harris and Philosophy too brought up in those discussions, but it's Natalie specifically that I've seen brought up the most. For some reason, her videos are very good for helping people realize that their points of view are just flawed or very misguided, and it helps them realize that they want to change. And the question to me is, why specifically does she have this effect on people while others might not? I think a big aspect of it is that her videos are just artistically brilliant and incredible to look at. There's not a single video of hers that doesn't adhere to some aesthetic and isn't absolutely breathtaking to take in. Arguably her best work is the projects that come across as sort of short films, because she is seriously such an incredible filmmaker. And in a way, I think it makes a lot of sense that this aspect helps her points get across. It's always been a big trend that people who seek to regress our culture spread their beliefs through emphatic speeches and waves of anger and really nice clothing. And progressive people, meanwhile, have a much stronger grasp on the arts and spread their ideals through that means, in a way which at the time can get them in a lot of trouble, but generally has a more long-standing effect on popular culture. To purposefully misquote the scholars of our time, the fascists have the outrage. But I don't care for the outrage. What I care about is music, and the communists have the music. I know it's sort of ironic that I'm making a video about ContraPoints and I'm not bringing across any of her aesthetic or audio quality. And the difference between me and her is that she spends weeks and weeks and months working on all these videos, making sure they're all fantastic and hilarious and gorgeous to look at and factually accurate, and she spends all that time. And meanwhile, I have a day and a half until I leave for VidCon, and I really want this to be done by then. I tried to compensate for all this by making my set look like David Lynch set it up, but I didn't order enough curtains. So I couldn't even do that right.
But
I think that the bigger secondary reason that ContraPoints is able to convert so many people back to the side of good is because she makes her videos not just with the motivation of exposing the other side and ridiculing them for having the wrong opinion, but also of helping them understand why their perspectives are misguided. Here's why I think she is so important to this system. As someone who, by my own admission, was pretty far down the anti-feminist rabbit hole, the same rabbit hole which can eventually lead to some pretty dark stuff and has birthed mass murderer after mass murderer, I have to say that I don't fully believe that I was there just by chance. Instead, I fully believe that YouTube actively promotes reactionary content which is filled with sensationalism over level-headed stuff which actually speaks the truth, entirely because the former makes them more money. Think about it. The YouTube algorithm exists to maximize Google's profits. It promotes channels which post more often, more than those who post less, because more people go through all the videos and see all the ads, yada yada yada. You get the drill. We've talked about this before. But we should all stop and consider the repercussions of what that might mean in the place of discourse. A YouTuber who cares about their topic, who spends months researching it and perfecting it, and makes something actually good, can never truly compete with some talentless jackass who knows absolutely nothing about the topic he's covering and can post whenever he wants because his videos have no substance. People who actually care and are actually smart and actually put effort into their content have always had a hard time competing with channels who can just download a BuzzFeed video, put it in Premiere, edit pauses into it, dub their voiceover, claim that the video represents all of that political topic, post it the same day, and repeat that about 4 times a week. Essentially, imagine if you lived in a world where for every topic you ever wanted to discover more about in your youth, the person who explained it to you was leafy as here, saying that the other side of the debate is just better at winning in the marketplace of ideals is inherently dishonest, because in many cases, that side is the only side that's being promoted. For the longest time, when I Googled trans, I didn't get intelligent news reports or scientific studies or perspectives of trans people or even people who knew trans people. I got a 5'2" middle-aged Lego man at some college campus going out of his way to confuse his audience into not being able to respond to his arguments, which frankly didn't make any sense.
Why can't you identify as 60? What is the problem with you identifying as 60?
It's not the same as gender. You can't just...
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender. You can't magically change your gender. You can't magically change your sex. You can't magically change your age.
You can still legally change it. People recognize
You can't legally change your age, by the way.
Wow. You can't change your birthday, so you can't change your gender. Left wing destroyed. Debating the way Ben Shapiro does is the intellectual equivalent of starting an argument with someone and then pointing a laser pointer in their face so they're too distracted to respond, and then turning to a third person and saying, "See, their argument doesn't even make sense." I mean, I don't even have to tell you that Ben Shapiro argues in bad faith, because it's his own explanation of what he tries to do.
So the only other reason that you should ever have a conversation or be friends with anyone on the left is, and not even be friends, is if you are in public in front of a large audience, and then your goal is to humiliate them as badly as possible. That is the goal of the conversation. The goal is not to convince the person. The goal is not to make friends with that person. The conversations that are going to make the most difference on campus are the ones where you're in public in front of large groups of people or with a camera nearby, and your goal then is to make these people look as bad as possible.
The difference between ContraPoints and Ben Shapiro is that ContraPoints argues for the sake of helping the other side and the uninformed understand the topics, and Ben Shapiro makes arguments for the sake of confusing the other side to convince the uninformed that his argument is exclusively the only one that makes sense. That's why when someone in his own party simply asked him to explain his perspective, he threw a hissy fit, called them a liberal, and stormed out of the show. In the same way that a baby has a low tolerance for pain, Ben Shapiro has a low tolerance for actual discourse. And that's why the other side seems so hesitant to attack Natalie or to even mention her. There's no single-sentence witty comeback that universally destroys a ContraPoints video. There's no way to pause her, or cut her up, or put her out of context and misrepresent her arguments. And even if you could pull that off, it would only end with your fans actually watching her, and then they wouldn't be your fans anymore, because her content is actually good. I wanted to highlight what is, in my opinion, the best example of a bad commentary channel trying to epically destroy Natalie. It's called Why ContraPoints is the New Anita Sarkeesian. Honey, it's 2019. Get a new boogeyman. The internet has become a dark, infected place, which has the power to both entertain and indoctrinate. And for us to have any chance of fixing this, to have any possibility of making the internet anything more than a burning dumpster fire, there's something you have to do. You have to subscribe to ContraPoints. And you can't just stop there. You have to bring Contra to your friends, your family, your enemies, everyone. Show it to your teachers, your crush, your weird uncle who makes you uncomfortable at family get-togethers. Print it on a cake, put posters around your town, scribble it on the side of an egg before slamming it on the head of your local fascist. Because ContraPoints has the power to save people. And if we can bring that power to the masses, then we all win. I'm just realizing as I film this that this video is probably going to be my most intellectually upfront and honest video I've done in a while. I mean, it's not that I've been lying in my content, but it's more that I've been taking a huge piece of my personality and sort of putting it on simmer for about 6 months. You know, just putting little Easter eggs and little references here and there. But I guess this one's pretty mask off. Relationship ended with the commentary community. Now BreadTube is my best friend.
Remember, subscribe to ContraPoints. It's I need.